Previously on This Is Us.
That Jesus is the safest place for real people with real problems, with real lives, and with real questions.
There were times that I would leave the service so angry, and I would say to Keena, I was like, this guy is a joke. He doesn't get it.
But what I saw was that when I changed, everything else changed too. So I became more gracious and forgiving, and Jeff and our marriage got stronger, and I became a better mom. And so in the end, I think the best thing for her was the change in me.
And he just let me ask questions, real questions, hard questions.
Keen, who has Jesus ever really changed? And if you know his background, he's got a
Seminary.
Yeah, I'm not equipped to argue the Bible with my husband. But what I said to him was, I just looked at him and I said, you know what, Jesus changed me.
Even though we're not ideal, even though we're a mess sometimes, even though I make mistakes that hurt others, even though others have hurt me, even though the world is a mess, that we have discovered that Jesus runs toward us, no matter who the us is. I have the absolute privilege of introducing the next people who are going to share their story. It's David and Wendy Evia, and I'm telling you, the first time I heard the story, this may sound weird if you're not if you don't know, aren't a believer in that Jesus is who he says he is. This may sound weird, but honestly, the first time I heard their story, it felt like Jesus was sitting in the room. Honestly, and you're going to see why in a minute. But the reason for me is because their story depicts who Jesus really is. It's awesome. So I can't wait for you to hear the story. It's really raw and honest and real. And in fact, it's so real and so raw that they felt like they wouldn't be able to get through it live on stage. So we've actually put it on video. And we're going to watch them share this. They're in the room. They're sitting with us. But we're going to watch them share this incredible story. So without any further ado, this is David and Wendy.
Exciting.
It's a lot of fun.
Passionate.
Love.
Crazy.
Partying. Lots of drinking.
Intense.
Alcohol.
Volatile.
Drugs.
Driven.
Just craziness. Lonely.
Uncherished.
Out of control.
Depression.
Fearful. Scary at times. So scary.
I was born here in Tampa. My family was not a church-going family, and my father became a very bad alcoholic when I was 5 years old. So I didn't see him much, and then when he came back in my life in my early teens, he definitely was still drinking a lot. As a result of that, I learned to drive when I was about 13 years old and had a lot of other experiences that early teenagers should not have.
I grew up in Winter Haven. Winter Haven's a really small town where everybody knows everyone, so you couldn't get away with very much there. But it's a nice place to raise a family.
We met at Melbourne Square Mall in 1985. I was at a jewelry store down the mall from the store that she was at, and one day I went down there to say hello.
He did. He walked in, he said hello, and that was all it took. For me, it was love at first sight.
She started finding reasons to come down to my store, and next thing you know, we were having lunch together and talking about all of our goals and aspirations and our career. She made the first move in the sense that she kept popping in all the time.
Right? I think I made the first move.
Yeah, I think we got engaged after about 6 months, and then it was a 1-year engagement.
Right.
Yeah. Well, partying was what we did when we didn't work. We did everything full throttle. So we chased our careers full throttle and we partied full throttle. So
it was really just what everybody did during that time, it felt like, or maybe it was just the people that we knew. Everyone was partying, and it was really hard to get away from it. If you needed a break, you really couldn't get one. We always had friends over. It started out fun, but it would end quite often in just being really paranoid, really scared, kind of regretful for what you had done.
it led to a lot of emotional mood swings, which made things very out of control. I would say for the few years that we did party a lot and did drugs, that it got to a point that we knew this needed to end. We started actually borrowing on our credit cards to keep our habit going. And over time, we got up to quite a large amount of debt doing that. That was another sign that we had to figure a way out of this. But I also look back, and to me it's a miracle that we're alive, that we didn't have health problems, some kind of heart attack along the way, or injury, or gotten killed in a car wreck.
We're probably the luckiest people alive. That's how it felt in our early days. We just felt like we could do no wrong. Everything we touched turned to success. We were just living large. So we were married for 4 years and decided that it was time to start a family. And we started trying. We got pregnant right away. It was just one of the happiest times in my life. I felt so good. I had a really easy pregnancy. I was just a happy pregnant woman. So David got fired from his job.
Well, the real tough thing about getting fired in the business that we're in, the jewelry industry, was that it was involving a theft.
It was a really horrible time because I was working for the same company and I didn't lose my job. They let him go, and pretty much everyone involved in our company knew that he was just having to take the fall for what someone else had done. He was the person in charge, he was managing the person who had stolen from the company, and he was going to take the fall. I was totally crushed in my career, wondering, now did I have to change careers? How would I get a job now? And with having Wendy pregnant, you know, that complicated things more. Going to one salary was devastating. We had started to come back from the debt from the lifestyle that we had, and we weren't completely out of that yet. And now we're looking at having to go back in debt again. So it felt like we were, going one step forward and 2 steps back. And now it was, we had stopped, we had made some smart decisions and improved the way we were living, but now this happened. Okay, so our second daughter is Sarah, and she was born on January 26th, 1993. And she was total opposite of our first daughter, Alex. She was our easy one, very laid back, easygoing. She's still that way to this day. Just wonderful addition to our family. Becoming a mom was just a really special time, and in all of this, horrible stuff that had happened with David losing his job and, all of that, it was this beautiful little part of our family that just added so much joy. We tried to really focus on what a blessing she was, and not to focus on, David and trying to find a job and where money was going to come from.
And here we are at this time that I'm without a job, or I'm trying some different jobs that don't pay anywhere near what I used to make. But meanwhile, the family's all coming back together. We had moved back to Tampa, and we've got all of our extended family around us, so there's a lot of love around us, there's a lot of unity, so we've got the support of the family. Then I, much to my surprise, get a phone call that there's a jewelry company locally that was hiring. A friend of mine had gotten a job there and said, I think you should apply, they're growing. And so I went down there and applied, and when I went through the background screening and everything, I figured everything would get shot down. But then lo and behold, I got hired. Years later, I found out the gentleman who had done the background check was friends with a security guy from the past company I was with who knew that I had to sort of take a fall for something, but that I wasn't responsible for it. So in 1997, we bought a small jewelry store out in Dade City. So we came across this opportunity. It was probably crazy at the time. Dade City's a small rural town, and we weren't from there. But we took a plunge, and I remember the day we went out there to see the store and met with the previous owners. And as we were driving away, Wendy said, "This is probably not the best financial move that we'll make, but it will be good for our family."
I said it would be very healthy for us.
Healthy for our family.
It'd be a healthy move. At the time when we bought the business in '97, I was not working. We had 2 daughters now, and I had been home with them for 8 years. And David, of course, was working a very stressful job, which is what led him to start looking for something different. It was scary for me that he was going to give up a known salary. And with me not having a job, it made it that much scarier. But I knew he had to have a change. This was not going to end well if he stayed where he was. And it wasn't good for our family. He was not home much at all. He would work 12-hour days in his previous career. So our kids are growing up and he wasn't really seeing them. So I knew it had to happen. And at first it was really a lot of fun because we now had our own business where we could take all of the great ideas and skills that we had learned working for corporate, and we could do all the things we really wanted to do and none of the things that we didn't think you should. And so it was fun because we were experiencing immediate success again. We were back into that working together and building something, and just exciting, fun. It was just, I felt like we were back together again and united and spending a lot of time together, building something great.
Well, even though we had stopped doing the harder drugs, I still did smoke pot, and then there was alcohol too. So I would say, we were definitely not to an abusive level. But at the same time, there were those releases. Plus, I was at the time a pretty big sports fan, avid Buccaneer fan. So there was always that Sunday game to go and scream at the team, because after all, it is the Bucs. Release some stress that way. Of course, the problem there is you're working 5 or 6 days a week now in your own business. And if you go to a football game on Sunday on top of it, how much time are you spending with your wife? And Wendy and I, we worked hard, we played hard, we parented hard, but the thing that usually got put on the back burner was time for each other, taking the vacations for just the 2 of us, or the date nights that we should have. There was definitely a lot of needs that she had that I was neglecting, and that kind of led to this one time, about 4 or 5 years into our ownership of the business, where she came to me. She was feeling down, and she said that she felt like I didn't cherish her. I didn't know what to do. I didn't really even know what that meant. I felt I was working hard. I was providing. The business was doing well now. We had bought a nicer home. we had nice things. We were able to do all these things for the kids. That's how I was kind of measuring it, and I didn't know what to do. And I even asked her, "What do I need to do?" And she didn't know what to tell me.
The stress that I was feeling was really more stress for David. I was loving the stage of life I was in, being at home with my daughters and being there for them and nurturing them. So I handled my stress by just doing everything I absolutely could for David. I made sure he didn't have to do anything around the house. I wanted him to be able to come home and just, be comfortable and relax, and I tried to minimize his stress as much as possible. I do remember one time actually telling my dad, sharing with my dad that I was feeling that way, and people would just look at me and say, what do you have to be depressed about? And I'd say, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't feel this way. So I finally got up the courage to actually go to David. I didn't really quite know how to explain it to him. The one word that I just felt like I had to kind of cling to and get across to him was, I don't feel cherished. I know that you give me everything. I have no reason to not feel loved and provided for and all of those things, but I don't feel cherished. I don't feel like I'm special to you.
We were having different times that issues were coming up with Wendy's mom. Her alcoholism was getting worse. We ended up having her back down here again after that, and eventually we had to go to the courts and take custody of her here. I had started to come to faith at this point. I remember I was always a big reader, and we went on a beach trip one time, and I forgot to take a book. And there in the nightstand was the Gideon's Bible. And I started to read it. I knew not to read the Old Testament. People told me that was really hard to understand. So I started at the beginning of the New Testament. And as I was reading the Bible, I just got blown away by what a book of love it was. I realized there were a lot of biblical principles that were in a lot of the professional books I had read. But this whole aspect of the love that was coming through in the Bible, that kind of made me question it some. During that process, I had heard this song, Fix You by Coldplay, and the words really struck me about the light. And there was a day on our back patio that I thought to play the song for Wendy and her mom, to tell them to listen to the message in this song.
Yes, I remember that day sitting out on the back patio with my mom, and David wanted us to hear this song, and he played Fix You for us. And I remember feeling like my mom really needed to hear this. Here I was, the court had ordered my mom to live with us, to be with me, to be in my care, and really most people didn't know how messed up I was. I had managed to cover up a lot of what I was going through, even with David, after telling him that I didn't feel cherished and him not knowing what to do with that. I just kind of went into my own little shell, put some walls up around my heart, and just tried to be tough. And then I get my mom, and I feel so ill-equipped to be able to be taking care of her. It really felt in over my head. But that song, there was something about that song that I just felt if she would listen to it enough, maybe we could get through to her, and maybe it would help her. I didn't realize that one day it was going to help me.
I think God wants to fix us. I really do, and I know that there's this feeling that whenever anybody tells you, I need to fix you, there's this pride that rises up, fix me, I don't need to be fixed. But I'm telling you, when I've gotten honest with my own mess, when I've gotten honest with my mess in my marriage and how I was adding to it, it's amazing when you get honest about, oh, I kind of do need some fixing, and allow a loving loving, loving Heavenly Father that wants our best to come in and through His grace and His mercy and His gift of life and love and hope and peace to come in and go, let me gently help you. I think we begin to find a better version of ourselves that can truly not only be better for ourselves, but be better for those around us, better for our spouses, better for our kids, better for our friends, better for everyone, people who don't even know us, their interaction with us. When we allow ourselves to see ourselves as broken and allow a loving Heavenly Father to come in and go, let me fix you, I think it changes everything for the better.
After I read the Bible that summer, I thought to myself that I needed to look into this. The big question had come into my mind. I had to decide how to do that, so I started researching it. I looked at the science, philosophy, and it was probably a year that I spent looking into this possibility, and I had again a lot of providential interactions with people along the way too. At one point I had a gentleman who's a pastor tell me, what you really need to decide is if the resurrection happened, because everything lays on that. And so I started researching that and historically and decided it's a definite possibility. And one day I got on my knees next to my bed and said the salvation prayer. And I started reading the Bible, looking for what do I do now?
I didn't really know that David was on any kind of spiritual journey. I don't think I was really paying that much of attention to what was happening. The fact that he was reading the Bible really did not clue me in on that anything was going on other than he was just seeking knowledge, which he always had done our whole life.
One of the things I found in the Bible was guidance on how to lead a better life and how to be a better husband. And I think that I found the answers as to what I could do to make Wendy feel more cherished. So I started trying to be a better husband. I started carrying my load, I should say, with a lot of things, trying to help with planning and working around the house more, not always being about work and the business.
This is a bad illustration, but I'll throw it in anyway. The movie Finding Nemo. Nemo gets lost, and his dad goes on this desperate pursuit of Nemo, no matter what. And he would go through everything all the time. And I think God is on a constant pursuit of people, whether they want it or not, whether they believe in Him or not, whether they shove Him aside on purpose or not. I think God is on a constant pursuit to love, to care for, to be there for people, no matter what.
The pain was so intense that I felt like I had just been squashed to the ground. And I felt like a person who I could trust and that was there for me all the time was now someone I didn't even know.
I think something that is so amazing about walking with Jesus is the consistency that He brings, the peace that He brings, the I'm bigger than this that He brings, the I got this that He brings. And I think when people go through major upheaval, knowing that He understands, first of all, that He knows my name, that He's there, and that He's bigger than anything I can face. I mean, He died and He rose again. He was bigger than the biggest thing we face, death. And knowing that He has that consistency and He's bigger than anything we're going to face, that's a big deal when you're going through something crazy. To know that He's there and He's got this and He's on your side, I think that helps tremendously with the emotional upheaval that we face sometimes.
So I noticed that something in David seemed to be changing. His behavior was different. I felt very suspicious of it, though. We'd spent a lot of years me trying to convince him that I needed more out of the relationship. and many years of not getting it. So I had really built this wall up around my heart and had become pretty selfish and self-centered. And I just looked at what he was doing and was suspicious of it, and if anything, probably felt like it's a little too late.
So Wendy's mother did end up passing away, and about 5 or 6 months later, my mom ends up getting very ill. We're having to care for her, some of that in the home, but she ends up eventually in the hospital in ICU. We've just been through so much at this time. Wendy was home this night. I went to the hospital to see my mom, and I was there pretty late that night. My mom was in really bad shape, and I didn't know how many more days I was going to have with her. So I got home at about 1:30 a.m. And before I went to bed, I went to check my email, and Wendy had left something up on the computer, and there was something I had been suspicious about, so I dug in, and I uncovered the information that pretty much confirmed that Wendy had been having an affair.
So David came in and woke me up. It was probably about 2 o'clock in the morning, and he told me that he had been reading my email and that he had found an email from someone and asked me what was going on. And I didn't even know what to say. There was nothing I could say to deny what he had found. I knew that whatever he saw, there was no way I was getting out of this or making up any kind of story. I felt pretty much devastated. I was ashamed. He had me, after we talked for a little while, and he was really, really angry, rightly so. He had me, our girls were both home because it was Christmas time, and he said, go wake up both of your daughters and tell them what you've done. And I did, and at that point I literally just felt so humiliated and so ashamed and just did not want to go on.
What do you do in that moment where everything you've known is just blown up? The closest relationship you have has just been ripped apart. Everything you've built is just falling apart. What do you do? What do you do in that moment? And another question comes up. What does God do in that moment? Because this is obviously wrong. I mean, it's sin. So it's one of the 10 commandments. So what does God do looking at this moment? How does he respond to that? And this is why I love who Jesus is so much, because Christians believe that Jesus represents who God is and what God would do. God sent his son to show, hey, this is who I am. And the amazing thing is that Jesus actually found himself in a moment where he was facing this exact moment, so we can know what God would do in that moment. Some of you have heard this account of what happened, but Jesus found himself in a moment where these religious leaders caught a woman in adultery and dragged her and threw her in front of Jesus on the ground, holding stones in their hand, ready to stone her. And they said this, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women." And then they asked a question that I think is so incredibly important for every one of us to ask when we find ourselves seeing a situation like this, and maybe when we find ourselves in a situation like this. But they said these words, "Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" What do you say? And it's in that moment that Jesus showed how God responds to these moments. Because before he said anything, it says this, but Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. And so often we miss that moment because in Jesus bending down, when everybody else was standing in judgment over her, Jesus bent down and looked at her face to face, eye to eye level, and said, didn't say these words, but in that action said, I see you. I understand you. I know you. And I am here not over you, against you, but I am here for you. I've got you. And then he stood up and said to everyone else, let any one of you who's without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And in that moment, every judge, every person condemning her realized that they too are human, that they too carry imperfection and sin in their own hearts. And as they thought about that, they dropped the stones and walked away. And in that moment, Jesus looked at her and said, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And with tears in her eyes, no doubt, she looked up at Jesus and said, no one, sir. And then he said, then neither do I condemn you. And the reason he could do that was because he knew he was about to pay the price for anything that anyone had done, including her, to make sure that she doesn't have to be separated from God. She doesn't have to face condemnation, that God forgives her. And then he said, in light of my grace, in light of my forgiveness, in light of my mercy, in light of my move to get rid of the condemners, I want you to now go and leave your life of sin. And the reason he said that is because he saw this woman caught in a place that was hurting her and those around her. And he said, take my hand, let's walk, and leave this because I don't want you to hurt anymore. So how does God respond? With forgiveness, with having her back, and with helping her move forward. That's how God responds to a moment like this. Let's get back to the story.
So our daughter was at home at the time, and she came home from work with a business card for a counselor and told us, you need to go see this guy. And we went to see that counselor the very next day. The advice that he gave us was, don't do anything, don't make any major decisions for 90 days. And we felt like that was probably really good advice, so we just tried to hang on.
I thought after 90 days we would be settled down and calmed down enough to handle the separation and divorce. When this all immediately happened, we were both just such a mess. We were both crushed, broken, angry. Communicating was next to impossible. Everything flared up into an argument. And I think that all I could figure that this period was for was so that when we did separate, it would be done in a friendlier way.
So initially, I really felt like I couldn't go on. I was so humiliated and ashamed that I really didn't think there was any way I would ever overcome it. David was angry. His words were very harsh. We were having a really hard time talking and communicating. But the one thing that I noticed is that he didn't leave. He stayed, and that was the first thing that really made me look into like what's going on with him. Why did he not just walk out? Over time, I realized that although he hated what I had done, he loved me. He still loved me in all my messiness and all my brokenness and this horrible, horrible thing that I had done to him. I could feel love, and it made me question where he was getting his strength from. It wasn't normal, but no one reacts that way to something like that. And so it made me question, and that's when I started finding out about the journey that he had been on. Up until then, I didn't really know that he had been putting his faith and his trust in Christ, and that was why he was behaving differently in our marriage and why he was changing over that time. And for the first time, I was able to build down those walls a little and let him in and let him love me.
So in the early days of those 90 days, here I was in my early relationship with Jesus and asking him, how was I supposed to get through this? I just accepted Christ and this is what happened, is like, really? So about 10 days into this 90-day period, I went and got the mail and came in and I was sorting through it, and I pulled out a postcard for a church that was doing this series called Marriage RX. And I walked over and showed it to Wendy.
And I just remember looking at it and it said Marriage RX, and maybe we should try that.
There was a message then the series that we went to about affair-proofing your marriage. And as we sat there in that message and saw all the things that we had done wrong, I left that message and I saw that these things could have easily have happened to me. And I shared with Wendy my feeling that I could have been the one who could have had an affair. And if you don't know the right things to do, if you don't have this guidance, it can happen. And I think that day my pride disappeared. It was taken from me, because I still did have an amount of pride up to that point that I wouldn't have ever done this. And one of the things that God showed me through all this was my brokenness from so many things, and that's all that my wife was another broken person, and that was able to have me be there for her through this process. And at that point, we still didn't really know where it was going to go, but we were going to be in it together.
But going to church and going and listening to this series on marriage opened up my eyes to, I saw all the things that we had done wrong. It was like our whole life just started unraveling right before me. I saw all of these, the lack of boundaries that we had in our marriage, and just all of the mistakes, all the things that we didn't know to do. And I realized that we had entered into this with no instruction and no way of ever being successful in our marriage. We were successful in business, but we did not have what we needed to be successful in marriage.
I think one of the things we try to do so much in this world is pretend we're not broken. That's one of the things that we strive as humans. We want to be perfect. We want to have a perfect facade. We want to look perfect. We want to be strong for the people around us. We don't ever want to show anybody our cracks in our lives. And that causes us to not be real sometimes, and not to not be genuine with others. But I think if we can get to the place where we can acknowledge those broken parts of us, that's when we can allow God to kind of step in and fill those cracks and bring something beautiful. I don't know if you've heard about the Japanese tradition that when they have a very expensive bowl or jar or something and it falls and breaks, most people are devastated. What the Japanese have done is they have taken those pieces and they mold them back together using gold, and they clean them up, and it's incredible to look at this broken piece of pottery or porcelain, whatever it is, with these gold pieces in between. And the Japanese say that it's way more valuable once it's a broken piece made whole by the gold. And I think that's very, very similar to what God does with us.
Here we were going to this marriage series, and they had a message. One of the series was on forgiveness and forgiving your spouse it also said that, when I received Jesus, I accepted forgiveness for all of the sins that I had done. And God showed me all the places that I had sinned. And if I wanted that forgiveness to that measure, that I needed to also forgive her too.
So the series really taught us so many amazing things. It was very eye-opening. I immediately knew I had to change everything about my life. Everything about my life was out of line. I quit going to the gym, which is where I had surrounded myself with a lot of people that were a lot like I was. They were selfish and arrogant and had no boundaries in their lives. And I left there immediately. I broke all contact with everybody that I had met through the gym. I had been listening to really dark music. I stopped listening to all of the music and started listening to the Joy FM. Stopped watching TV. I didn't turn the TV on at all for a very, very long time, and just started focusing on the messages that we were getting through church and reading scripture. So Easter 2010, David and I both got baptized. It was a really, really special day. I had just been this awful, broken mess, and I finally felt like I knew where I was going, who I belonged to. I didn't know a lot about what the future was going to hold, but I knew that I needed to follow Jesus, and I needed to tell everybody and proclaim that to everyone I knew, and that if I could just start taking those steps, my life was going to be a lot better.
Since then, to have her with me next to me as we both kept diving into the next steps, into serving in church or getting into small groups together and going to events and enjoying worship and Christian concerts together, that's just been something that is hard to even put words to. We have an amazing relationship with our girls. Our oldest daughter actually runs our business with us. So she works in the business, and we're so blessed and happy to have her doing that. And we are very close.
Boy.
Is there somebody out there?
Oh my gosh!
I'm so proud of you for telling your story and for doing this.
So I was just about to tell this sweet story about when we were in counseling together, and so we would go to the counselor and we would all meet with him together, and then David and I would leave, and Alex would go through some time with him alone. And on one occasion, he came and got me, and he called me back in, and he said, your daughter has something she wants to say to you. And I came in, and she just looked at me with the most sincere big brown eyes and just told me that she forgives me and that she loved me. And it was a really, really special time, because at this point, David and I had really worked hard to restore our relationship, and he had forgiven me, and I was working real hard on forgiving myself, but having her say that really just meant the world to me.
Oh, yeah. I almost forgot about that. That's crazy. It seems so far from where we are now.
So as far as the future, I am full of hope and joy, and I just know that now I have something guiding me. I know what my life is supposed to look like, even though I don't get it right all the time, but I have Jesus, this great example of to follow, and it just helps me and guides me in the most incredible way.
Well, I know that I still struggle with dealing with stress, and I also know that I have a tendency to make work more of a priority than it should. So I still have to work on making sure that Wendy knows that I cherish her and that she's a top priority for me after following God. And the really cool thing is nowadays she pushes me and she's telling me about what she's reading and what she's learning. And that's an amazing gift and blessing that God's given me. She's truly become the godly woman that I would have wanted.